talk about two forms tonight, labor trafficking as well as commercial sex trafficking. A lot of times you hear a lot more about commercial sex trafficking, but we don't want to forget about labor trafficking because, to be honest, labor trafficking is much bigger worldwide than commercial sex trafficking. So, why are we here? Why justice? It's because we know our God is a God of justice, a God of mercy, and He calls us to imitate Him. And the theme for advocating for the oppressed runs from the Old to the New Testament. And so our Christian faith assures us that our awesome God is unbiased. He takes no bribe, He treats the orphan and the widow justly, and He loves the resident foreigners, giving them food and clothing. He's not only concerned with those who are in the church, but His compassion and His love extends to those who are not, who don't have a shepherd right now. So, human trafficking, what is it? I'm going to give you the Polaris Project definition, and we'll talk a little more in the specifics. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery, where people profit from the control and exploitation of others. And to get to the heart of the matter, it really is the exploitation of vulnerability. We'll talk a lot more about that. So trafficking is really the act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, and obtaining a person for labor, services, or commercial sex acts. And traffickers have been both females and males. And anyone helping in that entire process is a trafficker. One is no less culpable than another. Now, how do they do it? Through force, fraud, or coercion. The only exception to that is when minors are involved in commercial sex trafficking, there's a presumption of coercion. So you don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion in a case of a minor being sex trafficked. It's automatic. Now, human trafficking, it can take the form of exploitation, involuntary servitude, debt bondage, slavery, and of course commercial sex. Now I want to make one distinction because I got this wrong at the beginning. So I want everyone else to understand the distinction. There is a distinction between human trafficking and human smuggling. Human trafficking is something that is forced, it's exploitation, and it's indefinite in nature. So it's indefinite unless somebody is saved. Human smuggling involves free will, involves transportation, and it ends when someone crosses a border and a smuggling fee or a trafficking fee is paid. Now, human smuggling can turn into human trafficking, and it often does, because the person who's being smuggled can't pay the fee, or because there are additional fees that get added on. And what happens is it turns into debt bondage where the costs can't ever really be paid. So we'll talk a little bit about labor trafficking. Involuntary servitude, debt bondage are probably the two most common forms. And it involves somebody potentially being held against their will, forced to work for either no pay or a lot less than what they were told. Usually involves paying an unreasonable amount of money or an unreasonable amount of debt. And it's frequently under the threat of violence to oneself or to one's family. Now, we're going to talk a little about forced labor. The areas you see it are domestic servitude, and I'll give you an example of that. There was actually somebody in Northern Virginia, D.C. area. Her name is Deborah. And she was from another country, and she was brought here to work as a maid. And she worked really unreasonably long hours. When she wasn't sleeping, she was working. And it wasn't just being a maid, but she was also taking care of a number of children in the household. And the only time Deborah was able to leave the house was when she was allowed to take one of the children to church once a week. And I don't know all the details leading up to her being identified as a potential trafficking victim, but there was an FBI agent who came to the church and was assigned the case, and he had to figure out how to get Deborah to trust him, because essentially she wasn't trusting anybody. And so what he did was he brought a dog with him, a little Hudson, and she started talking to him about the dog. And because of that, she started to trust him. And so when she built the trust, she started explaining to him, or started asking questions about what was happening to her. And so he got the information and then explained to her that in this country, you get paid when you work, and you are there are work, there's a limitation to work hours, you have to have days off and things like that. And so, long story short, Deborah's free today, and she's working as a nurse. So, pretty cool. Other areas: agriculture, manufacturing, service industry, construction, hospitality, begging, traveling sales, and I'll give you a couple examples of traveling sales crews. Ever, be at home on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon and have somebody knock at your door and try to sell you something? And, they'll put something in your face and say, it's for this, whatever, and you're kind of skeptical. A lot of times those are sales crews. And what the Polaris Project is telling everyone, or Polaris is telling everyone at this point, is not to buy anything from someone selling door to door, unless it's someone an organization like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, someone who is local, who's raising money for you get a lot of school fundraisers and stuff like that. Those are fine. And they're also suggesting that if someone comes to your door and they don't fit that profile, to ask them how they're being treated. If you still feel as though there's a concern, report it to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So that's one that actually hits home to a lot of people, because we've all had it happen. We've had it for probably about a year at our house, but certainly it's something that happens. Now, commercial sex exploitation, it happens everywhere we know prostitution happens. So street prostitution, residential brothels, strip clubs, pornography online, you name it, those are the areas. Now, who are the victims? The victims of trafficking have been men, women, adults, children, U.S. citizens, foreign nationals. Some are well-educated, some have no formal education, and of course you get documented as well as undocumented workers. So pretty much anybody. What do they have in common? What they have in common is that they are in some way have a vulnerability to be exploited. Now, most people think vulnerability, okay, there's economic hardships. Yes, but not always. Homelessness, yes, and kids, and I'm going to say this, kids who run away from home, there's a very, very high probability that within, say, 48 hours, they're going to run into a trafficker. Very, very vulnerable. Sometimes there's lack of emotional connectedness with family, or a lack of a support system. Sometimes there's drug and alcohol abuse in home. Sometimes there are immigration status concerns. And I'm going to butcher this because I don't have it written down, but Holly Austin Smith, who is an advocate for human trafficking, she was actually trafficked as a child. She wrote a book called Walking Prey. And she said that teens who are more influenced by the media, then the most positive role model at home are potential victims of trafficking, influenced by the media. Now, I want to give you one example that tends to shock people quite a bit. And in Northern Virginia, there have been cases of girls, predominantly, living at home, going to school. After school, their traffickers pick them up. They take them someplace to be trafficked for an hour or two, then they drop them off at home without anyone at home knowing there's a problem. That's scary. Now, I'm going to just talk quickly about common forms of trafficking. There's familial trafficking, and there have been victims who said their first pimp was their mother, their father, an uncle, someone in the family system. There's pimp control. I think we all know what that is. Gang control, or also I like to call it organized crime control, as well as trafficking in boys. Now, recruiting, where does it happen? And the recruiting is all based on false promises. So whatever it is that the teen or the person wants, that's what the trafficker is going to focus on. So online social media, texting, malls, skip parties, bus stops. There have been cases in schools. I will say that I don't know of any in this area. Neighborhoods, the boyfriend or lover boy method, I'll describe that in a minute. The girlfriends of pimps who recruit, as well as gang members and abduction. Now, gang members will not traffic other gang members. It's not a sign, it's disrespectful, but they will find others to traffic. Again, bottom line, false promises, preying on vulnerability. The boyfriend or lover boy method is the most common in terms of commercial sex trafficking lore in the world. I think it occurs in 164 countries or something to that effect, and it occurs pretty much in all of them. And it goes something like this. You have a girl who is vulnerable for whatever reason, meets someone who makes promises on what she wants, whether it's clothing or shoes or in the case of Holly Austin Smith, I think she wanted to be a musician. Sometimes it's, I'll make you a model. You can go to Hollywood and be discovered. So it's all based on false promises. And to us, that sounds like ridiculous. Why would anybody fall for that? But someone who is young, and a lot of these victims are just young, and it's what they want to hear, and they're willing to trust someone. And eventually, after things have been bought, things have been said, sometimes it happens, where the trafficker will say, well, I need you to be nice to my friend, and a rape occurs, and then it starts going. So false promises and lies. Now, what's going on in Central Virginia, and then we'll talk about red flags, and hopefully I can get through this pretty quickly. Human trafficking, it does exist here. While more hidden labor, there are situations where you have to be on the lookout for labor trafficking. More visible, but still not in your face, is sex trafficking. The community sits on the I-95 corridor, which is an interstate highway. DC and Richmond are in the top 20 human trafficking jurisdictions in the nation, and so we are in between the two. Sex traffickers, in particular, they bring their victims to a high-demand area. They advertise online, Backpage.com, there are a number of other sources, and then they use the interstate highways to move victims around. I also want to take a moment to say this. This is just as much a demand issue as it is a supply issue. If there were no demand, there would be no supply. Regrettably, there is demand. So that's something we can work on as a church. Red flags really quick here. Victims may develop loyalty and positive feelings towards their traffickers as coping mechanisms. So one thing to remember is that things may be different than they seem. Stockholm Syndrome is absolutely something that happens. Sometimes victims do not know where they are because traffickers frequently move them to escape detection. So one of the things in particular we talk to folks who are in the healthcare industry is we tell them when you're talking to a patient and they don't know where they are, that's a pretty big red flag. There's also quite a bit of fear. Now, personal documents, traffickers will take personal documents, particularly if it's someone who is here quite possibly on a legal visa. They'll take the legal visa away and they'll hold it from them, and they'll tell them that they will turn them in if they say something. The other thing, it isolates the potential victim or the victim. In terms of wages, a lot of times victims do not control their own money. They're just not allowed to either keep it or they're not given money as pay. Pay may be promised, and either it's not paid or it's far less than being told. But traffickers use money and the resources related to money to control victims. Safety. A lot of times, trafficking victims are threatened with harm, sometimes harm to family, and if it's somebody who is coming from another country, then sometimes their families in their home country are being threatened as well. A lot of times you'll see bruises. Many times trafficking will get confused with domestic violence. Sometimes that's okay if law enforcement or whoever sees it gets them away from the situation. There have been a number of cases where that has occurred, where it looked like domestic violence to something, so action was taken, and then when they peeled back the onion, it was something else. A lot of times traffickers threaten with deportation, arrest. In terms of freedom, a lot of times you'll see a victim who will defer to have somebody else speak for them. So that, again, that's another big sign. However, if it's somebody who doesn't speak English, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a trafficking situation. It may be by necessity. So a lot of judgment goes into this. In terms of conversations maybe with law enforcement or others, it'll sound rehearsed, because it is. And many times they're not allowed to socialize. So in Deborah's case that we talked about, she was allowed to go to church. That's kind of rare, which makes it even harder to identify. Living and working conditions. Someone may be promised a particular job, particularly if somebody comes in with a legal visa, they're told that they will be in the hotel-motel industry or a restaurant industry or something like that, but they end up doing something that is significantly different than what they were told. Many times, trafficking victims will have been deprived of food, water, sleep, medical care, dental care, generally just healthy living conditions. In fact, there was a trafficking victim that went up and down, or she, I don't know her real name, but we'll call her Karen or Kathy or something like that, and she she was trafficked up and down the I-95 corridor, and when she made her quota, she was taken through the McDonald's drive-through window and allowed to pick a couple things off the dollar menu, which didn't meet her quota. With food was withheld from her. So some serious health issues. Now, what's CDJI doing? We're trying to raise awareness. So things like tonight are just fantastic for getting the word out. We also do free movie nights, and we're happy to come to any church to do a free movie night. The last movie we did was Not My Life, and I think we're probably going to go to Pastor Malone's church and do the same thing. Happy to come speak anywhere. If you want us to come speak, you can go out on our website and you can sign up. And we're happy to show up wherever we need to. In terms of education, we actually are focusing on 2 vocations. One are healthcare workers, so you've heard me talk about that. The other is hotel and motel workers. Those are vocations where people are in a better, or having higher probability of actually seeing a trafficking victim and say, I would, my background's business. Well, it's not impossible. Someone who is in those industries, it might be a higher probability. So we have specialized training and red flags for them that they can look for. Prevention. If we don't try to do something to prevent this, I think we're going to be. I think it's going to be hard to keep this from growing exponentially. We're actually trying to work with school systems, but in addition, we actually will be doing a prevention program for church youth groups. And so we just signed the agreement, paid for the curriculum, and so we're really looking forward to rolling that out pretty soon. Advocacy, we were part of the Kids Are Not For Sale Coalition here in Virginia, and the first standalone human trafficking law was passed last year unanimously through the General Assembly. Nobody voted against it, and it was signed into law, and within 10 days of that law becoming effective, someone was being charged under it. That was really cool. Prayer, that is our greatest weapon. Absolutely. We've prayed for things, and God has blessed it, and it's just amazing. And he's actually opened doors we wouldn't even have known were there. So prayer is huge. We actually have put together a couple of evenings of prayer. We're happy to work with with churches and with other groups to do evenings of prayer. It's incredibly important. And then last but certainly not least, long term we are looking at aftercare programs. There are some aftercare programs in Richmond and in DC, but in between there really isn't anything. So we're focusing on a couple of things. We want to do a emergency fund to help short term, but we also are looking at what organizations could provide services to trafficking victims. And just remember that it's not just the trafficking. A lot of times drugs are involved, heroin. We had a case this year where the victim had a pretty severe heroin addiction. And so we're looking at other resources within the community. And then last but not least, we're looking at, okay, where are the gaps and how can we fill them? Because we think that's what we're called to do. And, the whole focus in terms of aftercare is restoration. In 2 Corinthians, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, they're a new creation. I'm a new creation because of Christ, and He didn't give up on me. And so we need to not give up on each other and do what He calls us to do. So we're really excited to move in this direction. And then, I know, Princess, you want to talk about some things that everyone can do. Do you want me to go through a couple suggestions first? Okay. First and foremost, pray individually as a church. Recognize the signs. Learn the red flags. If you suspect something, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's 888-3737, 888. It's also on our website. It's I've called it before. They turn things around pretty quickly. Bring the discussion and the literature you have to your family, your peers at work, schools, professional organizations, churches. Organize a training, host an awareness event. Happy to speak anywhere at any time. I've gone as far as Winchester, Virginia. So happy to go further if I need to. We also talked about in terms of labor trafficking, being a conscientious consumer. We are looking to do a fair trade fashion show in the spring. We almost have that scheduled. And so what you can do is again, to the extent you can, buy fair trade. A lot of companies now have their human rights and their human trafficking policies listed on their website. If it's overwhelming, I can give you 2 suggestions off the bat: coffee and chocolate. There's a lot of slave labor in coffee and chocolate. So, but if you buy Fair Trade, which is 10,000 villages, latitudes in the area, there's also Agora, which is a relatively new coffee shop downtown. You can buy your coffee there. In terms of other efforts, and I can't overstress this, help to provide safety nets for vulnerable people, in particular our homeless youth. They are such targets. I can't emphasize that, and particularly children in the foster care system. So those are some suggestions, and so I'm going to hand it back over to Princess. So I want to thank you for caring enough to come here tonight, and thank you for listening to me. I'm not as exciting or as talented as the other people who were up here tonight, but just thank you. And